Watches are hot, clothes are hot, fashion changes. But if you go to like a coin show, things that people put a lot of money in thought were gonna be very expensive, no one gives a shit about. Those markets are dead. There's no new blood. This doesn't exist if the younger generation doesn't give a shit about it.
Bid Stitch Gang, we're sitting in front of $500,000 worth of vintage watches. Now, a lot of our folks are into denim, they're into true, they're into tees, and those markets are all popping. But right now, the vintage watch market is exploding just as much and maybe even more so. And we're here with someone leading it, someone on the frontier, Jacek,
hey.
Watch And.
Thank you, thanks for having me.
Okay, so your website is actually called Tropical Watches. Could you tell me what the meaning is behind that?
Yeah, my personal fascination is with vintage and with things that have kind of like taken on like a deep patina. And the nickname that someone a long time ago gave to all these watches were tropical watches. I think it was sort of in relationship to they turn like these brown tones, and some of them, you know, maybe have had moisture in them, and like a lot of the stuff that age like that was from like in South America or like very kind of like equatorial kind of places
near the equator. Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Yeah.
And so obviously it's funny you say this, because in our, you know, more vintage clothing world, there is just as heavy an interest in you know, distressing or in patina within certain leather or certain forms of denim. And it's funny that your market and our market is kind of growing in that same sort of direction, which is there is this more positive reception to wear. It's funny that it's seemingly you're one of the earliest to it within the watch game, and it looks like the market's beginning to catch up to you. Yeah,
you know, there's always been a big subsegment of people that have been fascinated by it. You know, like I think we mentioned this, like I talked to you about it earlier off camera, that as sort of markets mature, they kind of want to differentiate themselves.
Yeah.
So people want something a little different and more complicated. So the added complexity of something being distressed is attractive because it kind of like, it makes it different.
Yeah.
So you're not going to be wearing the same jacket that someone else is going to wear or the same pants that someone's going to wear.
So right now in vintage, in vintage clothing at least, there's actually a premium associated with certain forms of wear on clothing. Does that premium also exist within the watch world?
It does, yeah. So if you have something that, in essence, the case and the bezel are still really beautiful and not destroyed, but the dial has turned to like a beautiful brown tone.
Yeah.
The intensity of the patina, or the intensity of the way that how brown the dial has, kind of like makes the price exponentially more expensive. So you could have a $20,000 watch with a black dial from like a GMT from the 70s. That same watch with a brown dial is sometimes worth 50,
That's
60,
crazy.
75,000. And there's been instances where like the value is maybe multiplied by 3 or 4 or 5 times as much as like a regular counterpart that hasn't aged.
That's so interesting.
And it's subjective, you know what I mean? Some people are gonna find it very interesting, and other people are gonna be like, that's just old or used.
Yeah.
And you know, like there's people like me and there's people like you that like curate and are fascinated by these kind of things. And the market is responding with other people. There's enough other people that feel the same way.
Yeah.
So it makes it interesting.
Now let me ask you this. Now I'll give you what I think, but you tell me what you think. I know you're not a sociologist. I know you're not like a philosopher, but what do you think are these sort of external factors that are leading to this cultural emphasis on wear, on vintage, on patina, on distressing? What are those external factors that are making this market what it is today? Yeah,
well, I like to think of it as a sort of a counterculture to like the digitized world that we live in. I feel like people look at a screen, people are surrounded by technology, people are surrounded by things that have an obsolescence to them. You know, like Apple Watches that you wear for a few years and you throw out. And I think that people are shifting away from that. They have been for a while. I think maybe it's become more of a norm and more younger people are sort of getting into it. And I think it has to do with sort of like wanting to connect with something that is real instead of just connecting to something that you're going to throw away in a few years. And before, maybe you would want, like, if you were like a kid, you get like a hole in your shirt, you throw it out. And now it's sort of a memory. And it's sort of like, it connects you to that item where it was lived in, there was something happened in it, it was a part of your life. And I think that like as everything becomes kind of like the culture becomes throwaway, people are sort of like connecting to like things that have some kind of like value and like long-term value. And I think and a lot of brands have moved to sort of like calling it like a luxury space.
Yeah.
But all these products were designed to last a lifetime. And that's what's special. And also too, I think, you get older, everyone's getting older, and when you get older, you sort of understand that like the limited amount of time that you have here, you sort of understand that you as a human being degrade too. So when you connect to that and you realize this isn't forever, the things around you become more interesting, especially the things that like stay with you for a long time.
Yeah.
So I think it's only gonna get more important.
Yeah.
And I think the sad thing is with all of these products on the table, all these watches, that over the years there's less and less of them. Sometimes they get water damage, sometimes they get lost, sometimes they get stolen. So the interest is increasing and the supply of the product, it's not made anymore, is getting a little bit smaller. So that there's going to be like a upside in value associated with the stuff.
I also sort of think, and you tell me whether you agree or disagree, but with social media, there's more of a need to distinguish oneself, right? And I think that with sort of certain fashion trends, certain pieces of clothing becoming more traditionally ubiquitous, there's more drive from consumers to have something that's one of one, to have something that doesn't look like what everyone else is posting.
Exactly. Like I think that, girls had this a long time ago where they're like, they don't want to come to the party in the same dress. But I think that for the demographic that I sell to, which is mostly men and some women, I think that there's also this sort of like need to differentiate themselves. You don't want to have the same Apple Watch. You know what I mean? If you look at what people are wearing, a lot of people are wearing the same things, and that's fine, and they're happy. But a lot of times people want to find out what else is out there. What's next? What's something unique that I could enjoy that's very personal to me? So like this personalization happens with watches because every single one ages to a different way.
Yeah.
So even if you had the same reference from the same year, you could go, to the party and you're not wearing the same dress. You're both wearing things that are very, very different from each other. And I think that connection and that one-of-one kind of personalization kind of aspect, that's why vintage watches and that's why I think vintage clothing connect with people. You know? So.
Well, talk to me about one of the pieces that connect with you in terms of its age or its condition. Is there one piece in particular on this table that you really, really like?
Yeah, well, this is a personal watch that I've had for almost 10 years. It's the red Submariner.
So beautiful.
And it's a watch that probably, has aged along the way because I wear it a lot. I wear it probably 90% of the year. And it means something to me because this isn't just a watch that I have for myself and use. I have 2 kids and I have 2 red Submariners that will eventually give to one of each kids. So this isn't just a representation sort of the things that I love. It's also going to continue, and hopefully my kids, long after I'm gone, will be wearing this watch and like thinking about like, oh, Dad, got this for me. Dad had it for a long time. And so the patina, the imperfections about it, all of it is like very, very special to me. So this is like, if anything was not going to be sold and I only have a few of those things, this is one of those watches that I wouldn't sell.
It's incredible. And you hit on something really interesting here, and there's sort of similar market headwinds within the vintage clothing space. And it's that with new items having a shorter and shorter lifespan due to the quality of how it was made, there's this emphasis on vintage, whether it's clothing or whether it's watches, because the idea is they were made to last not just one lifetime, but multiple lifetimes.
Yeah, and that's the same thing. Like the 70s Rolex watches, didn't have this kind of built-in sort of obsolescence that a lot of new stuff does. The way that they were produced using materials that were very like sturdy. The movements were very robust. The dials went, even though they degraded in terms of like the coloration and stuff like that, they're meant to not to be thrown away after a few years. It's like you could buy one of these watches in the 70s and wear it to the end of your life. And I think products aren't really designed like that anymore because it makes them really expensive. And from the perspective of the company that is making this product, it's, what are you going to sell one pair of jeans to one guy, one watch to one guy, and he'll never buy another watch? It doesn't make any sense. And at some point, someone was like, let's make this shit fall apart so they'll buy more of it. You know what I mean?
This is there's a term for it. It's called, I heard about this, manufactured obsolescence.
Yeah.
Like you're making it to break.
Yeah, you're making it to break. And so this is sort of an era that these things weren't meant to break. They were meant to be used, and they could keep being used and be like fixed and adjusted along the way, but they were never meant to be thrown away.
Could you talk to me? So I want to bring things back a little bit. You said tropical watches, and you're talking about the wear and the patina on this piece in particular. I want you to kind of give a sort of, for those that have no idea what the heck that even means. Maybe let's go through some of those keywords.
So the simple sort of like explanation of how patina relates to watches is sort of the easiest, most kind of like obvious kind of thing is the way that the colors have changed. So the bezel on this one, which was from the factory, was black, has faded to like a navy hue. So the paint degrades to a point where the color changes from a dark color to a light color. You see that in clothes too.
Of course.
You know, I mean, this T-shirt used to be like black, and it's like faded to like a light gray tone.
Yeah.
And so the same thing happened, but it's a very slow process that takes, you know, instead of like being like 5 years or a few washes or 100 washes, it takes 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. And the same thing goes to the markers on the dial. They were produced with a material called tritium, and tritium over time degrades like old paper does, from like a white tone to like a creamy tone to like a more of a brown tone. And then there's actually a point in time where it'll go beyond the aging, you know, where it starts degrading. It'll just like kind of crumble and fall apart.
Wow.
So not only are we looking at something that is aged perfectly, it's aged perfectly now.
Yeah.
In 100 years, it might go past where the usability, functionality of the watch. And then like we exist in this like blip of time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's what all these things are. There's a perfect moment where there's a connection to everyone had like some people love the way that's aged, some people want it aged a little bit less. Other people want it a lot more distressed. And everyone, that's why like it's fun, because it's like a choose your own adventure thing.
Yeah.
Everyone can decide what level of patina, how many holes their shirts have, how many, you know, how much the thing has kind of like fallen apart. And that's what makes it really personal, because it's a very specific, very kind of like it's like an intimate kind of like appreciation of like an object.
Yeah. So there's a term in our space, it's called like distressed. And there's sort of two camps when it comes to distressed clothing. Those that are completely against it, and those that will actually seek it out more than anything. They want it to be almost unwearable. I'm curious, is there a line for you when it comes to the, I guess, unwearability of some of these pieces? Or are you just like everything is game?
Yeah, no, there's a same parallel in our space, you know, like I like to think of it as like everyone sets their sort of like their bar at a certain kind of level. Some people want things that are just like lightly worn in. Some people want things that are destroyed. And I think the funny thing is, as I think that the more you collect, the more you look at the stuff, the bar gets set further. Yeah. Where usually the people that like more patina, more holes, more distressed, are people that are constantly kind of looking to like further and further down the rabbit hole of you know, fashion, or you know, like an object or something. And of course there's a point where, you know what I mean, like in a t-shirt, like my nipple's almost out, you know what I mean? Then like maybe it's like, you know, for like the regular consumer, it's like it's too much. Yeah. But maybe for me it's like I don't care. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. So everyone has to choose their own kind of like point in time that gives them some kind of joy. And it's like, of course, there's going to be other people that are going to hate on that. But I think the cool thing with the watches, because it's a much more mature market than sort of like just a fashion, is that the people just kind of at this point in their life don't care. Be like, you could do whatever you want, you know what I mean? And hating on someone's like ideas of what makes them excited about something, kind of like you kind of lose the point of it. You know what I mean? Like, so.
So you've been in the game for a while. Yeah. In the vintage clothing space, there's sort of this new generation of up-and-coming vintage dealers who are really blowing up into the space because they obviously have social media savvy. They may not know the items as technically as some of their predecessors did, but they're really, really flooding into the space, and it's leading to interesting dynamics within the reselling space. I'm curious, we all know that there's many social media folks jumping into the vintage watch market as well. Could you talk to me generally about what that market looks like between you, some of your older predecessors, and this new generation of new dealers coming in?
Yeah, of course. I think that, like every single market evolves in its own kind of way. And sometimes it evolves in a way that makes it more fun and more enjoyable. And sometimes it evolves in a way, especially as supply sort of dwindles into this like cutthroat kind of like nasty kind of space. So, like I'm bridge the gap between like the old school and kind of like the new school sort of dealer. I'm on social media. I've been doing it for a very long time. So I have like a lot of connections, a lot of watches, a lot of pieces come through me. But I'm not like the old type of dealer that didn't even use the internet. There used to be a time in space 20 years ago where people would sell watches without photos online. They would write the description, you would send the money, and then the watch would come without a photo. It was like insane. And also too, people, the amount of knowledge that people had, it wasn't crowdsourced enough where people didn't even understand.
Yeah.
There was debates on if certain dials fit in certain watches and if this era even produced something like that. We're going through a little bit of that now in the online watch space too, where people are saying like rare things are actually faked and put together.
Yeah.
And you could kind of like, there's this albino Daytona that is very expensive, but people are saying that 20 years ago, they just created that watch and people are selling it now for like $1 million. But some people thought it would be worth $5 million.
Yeah.
But so there's these like
That's
debates
so weird.
that go on.
There's this disparity. There's similarly in the vintage clothing space.
Yeah.
It's still sort of the Wild West in terms of
it is the Wild
pricing, in terms of at some degree authenticity, what's good versus what isn't.
Yeah. And
so it's funny seeing it in your space as well.
And I think it's also the people sometimes that have the loudest voice that are the best at creating like content and creating the most persona on social media. They're not exactly always going to be the people that maybe care about the market the most or know about the market the most. Like probably in your space, there's very quiet collectors that are like experts that have like amazing curated collection.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's Japanese probably like guys that have like insane denim that
no social
blow
presence.
Everything away that anyone else is talking about,
Yeah.
but they're not like vocal enough. And I think that, we're reaching this kind of like weird inflection point where sometimes the loudest person is getting the most attention, but maybe the loudest person maybe shouldn't get the most attention. And it's interesting, but again, you can't control that.
Exactly.
You have to sort of like let it kind of evolve. And I think that people will eventually find that, like false idols are false idols and the people that are kind of like know what they're doing, maybe that aren't as vocal, will get discovered. We hope that that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's going to happen. Maybe it won't in our lifetime. You know what I mean? But it's a weird space.
It's part of growing within any market. I think.
Market is going to evolve in its own sort of like little bursts and have like things that like maybe like a purist would think is stupid but I think that you just kind of have to let it watch it kind of unravel on its own. So.
Yeah. Let's get back to the watches because I want to also talk about one of the oldest pieces that you have. And I might be incorrect, but is it this one?
Yes, yeah. So this is the oldest watch. This is a chronograph. A chronograph is a watch that you could track. It tells you the time, but it also, in addition to, tells you could time something else with it. So it's basically it's a watch with a stopwatch.
Okay.
And so usually chronographs have subdials, which are little extra indicators on the watch that correspond to sort of like the top and bottom button. And so when you I don't think this was even wound because it was sitting in a safe, but you wind it a little bit and you press the button and the second hand starts ticking. And that usually corresponds to something. So if I stop a chronograph now, like in a stopwatch, it stops at a certain kind of point on the dial.
Wow.
And so the best explanation of what it's tracking is speed. So, for example, if you have a mile track and you go around the track in 12 seconds, then you know that your speed is like a certain measure of. This is so hard to read because it's an old piece, but essentially it tells you you're going 60 miles an hour.
Yeah.
If it takes you 60 seconds to go the mile track, you're going 60 miles an hour.
What's the brand on this watch?
So this is a Rolex. This is a Rolex
Wow.
from, I think this one is from the 30s. I forget.
Incredible.
Again, sometimes the technical stuff,
Yeah.
this is a watch that we haven't listed on the site. I bought it specifically to kind of like showcase some of the early kind of like very, very early kind of stuff. It's very cool.
It's amazing.
And the black dial, and the focus wasn't so much of like just the reference number, it's just the way that it's aged. Like if you look at the actual dial, the patina, it's like degraded, where the print is almost hard to read. But if you like loop it and look at it a little bit deeper, you could see that it's like to some eyes like mine, perfect.
Yeah.
To other people, they may say it's just like broken and used, but it still works. It still functions. It's at this point, what is it, like 80 years old?
Yeah.
So probably better off than what we're gonna do when we're 80 years old. So.
Okay, I'm curious. In our space, in the vintage clothing space, there is obviously dwindling supply. So there is more desperate ways in which vintage clothing dealers are sourcing. In our space, the most creative of ways is sourcing directly through homes that have been abandoned, or from quote unquote original owners that don't really have a full understanding as to where the market is on their pieces. What does the market look like on your side when it comes to sourcing and the means people will go to be able to find some of these rare pieces?
Yeah, like 20 years ago, 15 years ago, there still existed a market where a lot of original owners were coming into the space because the values of the actual products were so expensive, people were selling the stuff. But I think that this market has matured to the point where there's not a lot of new fresh inventory that comes into the space from original owners, because the people that bought them already are in their 70s or 80s. They've either passed the watches on to the next generation. If they have interest, maybe they keep it, but a lot of times the second generation just sold it.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of new things coming into the space.
That's unfortunate.
It's unfortunate, but like any market, in 50 years there's going to be nothing new. Everything is going to be discovered, and same with clothing. In 50 years, everything, the bend houses, everything will be like rummaged through, and there's only a limited supply of what you have. So to find fresh market stuff is extremely hard. And realistically now, what the supply that we have goes from collector to dealer to dealer to collector, collector to collector to auction house. And it just kind of like, the carousel is sort of like a closed loop system.
Yeah, it's a closed loop. Interesting. So in our space, there's like what's called the off the back challenge. You're trying to find original owners that are literally wearing the piece and will sell it off their back.
Yeah.
Have you ever had the opportunity to source directly from an original owner?
Yeah, I've done it.
Really?
Off the wrist kind of buys where.
Have you really?
Yeah, like like there's some cool, interesting person. Like I've sourced a watch. I remember sourcing an expensive, very beautiful gold GMT from the guy that drove the shuttle from the Volkswagen. I had a GTI maybe like many years ago, and the service center the guy would drive you to your house or your office.
Yeah.
And so it was a shuttle guy he's the shuttle guy that drove you to the rental car place.
What?
And he was wearing the watch, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. Do you know that this, you're wearing something really expensive? And the guy's like, oh, really? and then, I told him, that watch at that point was selling around like the $30,000 range. And I was like, I as a dealer, I could sell it for 30. If you were ever willing to sell the watch, I'd buy it for 25,000.
Yeah.
And he was so blown away because he didn't have any idea of what the value was, because he bought it a long time ago for a few $1,000s. To him, there's been many instances in time where I buy watches from people and they're life-changing moments for them because they had no idea that they were going to, their watch was so valuable.
Yeah.
I remember buying a $400,000 Paul Newman Daytona from a couple that found me somehow. It happened much more before. So you see somebody wearing a watch, you buy it, or someone contacts you and you tell them the value and they're like blown away. It's like the Antiques Roadshow.
Yeah, of course, we've all seen the clips. Yeah.
So that's happened many times before, I think. But the cadence of that happening has gotten less, and so far in between. Like, it's exciting. I want to find things that are fresh to market, but they don't exist as much anymore.
Yeah, I think,
and also, but like your market, there's much more people looking for it.
Sure.
So it dilutes the sort of the ability to be the guy, like at the estate sale or whatever, or some retirement home.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
So no estate sales for you?
No, like a long time ago. No, like, like to maintain, like a presence in the space.
Yeah.
You can't, if you spent your day going to garage sales and estate sales, you would find, one watch like a year, but the internet has sort of like brought the space into like a different plane.
Yeah.
And to play in that plane, you have to be able to, like, because I sell so many watches and people find me online, they offer me watches too. So like search engine optimization is much more important in terms of finding cool watches than than hunting on the street.
That's so funny you say that. Yeah, I think our space is kind of moving similarly, and that folks are actually using like Facebook ads more so as a tool to find than they are going to estate sales like they used to, or going to the Goodwill bins or whatever.
Back in the day, people would put ads in like car magazines.
Yeah.
I'm looking for old watches and stuff like that. So, but over time, also the market, since it's become so expensive in some aspects of it, there's like specialists that like people kind of like trickle up to like me to offer me a watch. Sometimes I get offered a watch from a dealer somewhere in Florida and a dealer from somewhere in New York, and the original owner all emailed me at the same time.
No way.
And I'm looking at the same thing. And I know that person is kind of reaching out to the biggest players in the space.
Yeah.
But because I'm very easy to deal with, I pay on time, I'm like been in the space for a long time and I have a perfect reputation, people find me somehow.
Wow.
And so the only way to survive is to be really fair and to buy things at a high number.
There's longevity behind that.
To get it. And then, you curate it and you do it over and over again. And that's how you survive in the current market of where we are.
Could you give us, and you don't have to, but could you give us any transparency as to like what your margins look like when it comes to buying and selling? And like what is healthy for you?
Well, I think that if you aggregate all the sales throughout the year, I know these numbers because there's a business side to this where you have to be very competent in understanding that kind of side. There's taxes, there's if you don't know that, you're not doing well. So I think that the average margin for me is like 8%. So that means in a $10,000 sale, I'm making $800.
Yeah.
Sometimes more, sometimes less. So my aspect isn't to kind of increase this to make a crazy margin.
Yeah.
It's to do volume. This month has been particularly good for me. It's this Christmas season is a hit or miss. Sometimes people are buying a lot, sometimes they're not. It's the 11th day of the month. I've sold $2 million of watches. So at 8%, you could.
I need to get into watches.
You could kind of, like a 2 million, 8%, you could figure out, what the profitability is. Of course, there's overhead. Of course, there's expenses, taxes, shipping, insurance. The ever complicated kind of like, I have people that work with me that we spend a lot of time like curating, looking, photographing. So it's at this level, it's a good business.
Yeah.
To break into it is very hard. To learn the knowledge is very hard.
Of course, it takes years.
The risk of understanding these kind of pieces, you could easily lose 20 grand or make 20 grand in a day. And I think that, it's a hard space.
That's what I wanted to ask you next, actually. It's funny you said that because you have to have such a detailed knowledge of pricing to not get burned on what's kind of small margins, right? You're paying $10,000 to make $800.
Yeah, there's times where like I'll lose money on certain things. I actually in a span of a week, there's always a few watches that I lose money on.
Yeah.
Because I either anticipate that I like it because it's really cool.
Yeah.
And maybe the market doesn't respond in the same way.
That's so interesting.
And then you basically have to adjust. People are buying. Like markets are very complicated now too, where people are all try to go to one place. Like, I don't know how to do the parallels in your space, but everyone likes a certain kind of like brand. And then all of a sudden people are like, oh, that brand's not cool anymore. We're going here. And so my market is the same. And so if you aren't actively buying and selling a big number of watches, then you sort of have to like anticipate what's going to happen. And sometimes you make mistakes. Sometimes you think, oh, this is going to be really cool. And then it's not, no one else thinks it's cool. And then you lose money on it.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I know right now there's, Jacob Elordi paid for a AP bamboo band. And I know that there's like a lot of interest in that right now. And it seems like it kind of popped out of nowhere.
Yeah, like you'll get these pops and you'll get this excitement, but then here's the problem. Like now this watch is hot. Everyone wants it, so you can't find it for an amount that makes sense anymore. You know what I mean? So, and also these markets work inversely too. Their AP, for example, a brand that you brought up, not this last summer, but the summer before, I had one that I bought at the peak of the market. It was a 5402, an early version of a Royal Oak. I bought it for $200,000, and at auction, I held on to it for a year and I sold it for $50,000. So I lost $150,000 on a watch. And you know what I mean? I was at this auction watching this happen, and then like, you know, it was the minimum reserve to sell.
It.
And then like, it's like, it got there, and then I was like, okay, it's maybe gonna go to 80, 90,000, and then it just stopped. And they're like, the guy hammers it, and I was like sitting there going like, fuck.
We gotta get footage of that, by the way. I'm curious if you have it, but that's
no, I don't have
crazy.
The footage. I just have the memory of sitting there and being like, God damn it. And then the people that knew how much I paid, the auction house, were looking at me, and they looked at me, and they're like, oh shit. And I'm like, yeah, fuck you guys. So it was, you know, but that's if you want to be on the bleeding edge of buying stuff that people are into and are hot, you're going to have to sometimes take risks. And sometimes they pay off, sometimes they don't, which makes any industry now very, very complex.
Of course. Let's talk about one watch in particular that's super hot right now. I've noticed anecdotally that the Explorer market is just absurd, and it's a beautiful, beautiful, one of the seemingly more simple Rolexes, but the age and wear tells so much about this piece. Could you talk to us about this one?
Yeah, so this is a 1016. It's from the 60s. It's a gilt dial.
Could you talk to us about gilt dial?
Yeah.
The meaning?
So pre-67, majority of everything printed on the cases was in gold print. So this style of printing, this sort of style of dial production was a lot more complex. Later on, they simplified it and they just started using white like print instead of like embossing it with a gold, or there was a channel that was set lower and they put the gold in and they put a clear coat on. So basically what they did is they simplified the production. And so you lost some of that kind of like that sheen and tone. And also the different materials that they used from the 60s had a tendency to turn these kind of brown colors. And this watch is that, you know, like it's degrading a little bit, some around the markers, because this is a watch that has, I think, radium in it. Yeah, this is early enough that it has radium in it. It's like degrading the kind of like the material around it as it's like constantly radiating it a little bit. So you get this kind of beautiful, what I think is a beautiful kind of like patina, but also too, you know, the watch is here because I haven't sold it.
Yeah.
Because it's very, you know, like it's a complex thing. I think it's pretty, but sometimes also too, our photos on our website make something look worse than it is.
Doesn't do it justice.
Yeah,
sometimes.
like I think that it's hard to photograph consistently, and if you blow it up with the right lighting, sometimes a little scratch looks a lot more magnified than it is, and that's sort of like what this, you know, this watch is kind of like going through. But yeah, the 1016 or the Explorer 1 market is getting more expensive, and you know, I've been through some of these like many times. There was a time where 1016s were very expensive, and then they kind of dropped, and they were very expensive, and they dropped, and I think they're kind of coming back a little bit now. So it shifts, and if you're trying to time the market to make money, I think in the long run everything will become more expensive, but it's sometimes you don't know what's going to happen. Yeah, and finding the product the right price is the big deal.
Yeah, so. I mean, there's like a common phrase. I don't know if it applies to you as well, but it's not timing the market. It's like time in the market.
Yeah,
you know, and kind of being able to ride the wave as it comes.
And that's hard to do. It's hard to do. It's like you have a lot of money, then it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? You know, the people that have the most valuable things are hoarders. They didn't sell them even when the market was high, and they got higher and higher. But you know, and the people that were like, there was a point where like, oh, this is expensive, I'm going to sell it. And who knew that it was going to get much more expensive or it was just going to die off?
Yeah.
You go to, you know, watches are hot, clothes are hot, fashion changes, but if you go to like a coin show, the dudes there, or stamps, things that people put a lot of money in thought were going to be very expensive, no one gives a shit about.
It's so interesting.
Those markets are dead, and the people that there's no new blood in the space. So like this doesn't exist if the younger generation doesn't give a shit about them.
Yeah. Do you do believe though that the younger generation, despite the very high entry point in terms of cost, do you think that there's longevity behind it, right?
Yeah, like I'm obviously biased because I'm a dealer in the space, but I've been sort of surprised how, you know, I'm getting older. I'm in my 40s now, and the younger generation is in their 20s, or, you know, there's an interest. And it seems to be that the the internet and like the internet, the Instagram and like all these things are sort of promoting this kind of like uniqueness of the space. It's captured an audience.
Yeah.
It's captured an audience that's rebelling against this digification and like obsolescence of things, finding some kind of like beauty in this world.
For sure. I think there's something else too. This is probably not going to make it.
No, go ahead.
I think that people. I think it's getting. This is going to sound weird, but it's like harder and harder to buy houses now.
Yeah.
And I think that people still need to be able to display the fact that I have money.
Yeah.
And so I think with homes becoming to the point where for a lot of the younger generation is somewhat inaccessible, watches are like a good way of being able to establish the fact that like I am making money.
Yeah.
And I have taste. And while I can't afford, a $2 million house in San Diego, I can get a $20,000 or $30,000 watch.
Yeah. No, that's kind of almost like a sad kind of thing, but it's true.
Yeah.
That like the certain things have stratified to a point where they're inaccessible now.
Yeah.
So people are always looking for like something else cool to kind of like, like at the end of the day, you want someone to validate your feelings about like, like you want to look good, you want to feel good, you want other people to appreciate you for your for your curation, for your like ability to kind of find something interesting. It's like everyone wants to find a connection to something, you know what I mean? And so, watches have become a thing that because it's wearable. It's very visible.
Exactly.
You're wearing a watch. I know what you're wearing. I know how much it's worth. I like, instantly sort of I could put together a picture of who you are.
Good with it, yeah.
So I think that it's a way for people to be seen and not just like online, because you can make a whole world of like being seen online, but in a way that like, especially for men, for guys, it's something that it's a differentiator.
Yeah, it shows some taste.
In Japanese culture, I've been going to Japan and buying watches for many, many years. There was a point in time many years ago that I was in Japan once a month, long before any influencers or people were there. I was literally the only white guy like going through stuff, finding things, and I didn't care about so much about clothes, but I cared about watches. And one of the things that I learned was, if you're you would go to a guy who's like a bartender and they're wearing a nice watch, and I was like, oh dude, that's expensive. You know what I mean? He's like, someone said to me one time, it's like, I'd rather not eat and look good and feel like I have something of value, and I'd rather go hungry. And then I think that's what kind of like, I think that's what's happening a little bit too. You know what I mean? People want, in a very homogeneous society like Japan, people want to have feel like people want them to see like, oh, like, I know what I'm doing, you know what I mean? Yeah. I'm worth hanging out with.
Yeah.
That is sort of happening, and watches are sort of a conduit that people are using. So is fashion. So.
Yeah. And speaking of standing out, we've got another piece. I call it the Tony Soprano Presidential. This is a pretty remarkable piece. Obviously, it's a little bit more showy than some of your more subtle pieces that you brought, but it stands the test of time. It's an iconic piece. Could you tell us about this one?
Yeah. So again, I brought a very patinaed version of an 18238. So this is a model from the 90s. It's 36 millimeters. In my opinion, the how big a dress gold watch should be. There's sport models, but I think for dress models, this is the size. They make 40 millimeters and 41 millimeters of these watches. But the 36 millimeter sort of encapsulates sort of the kind of shape that doesn't feel obnoxious. And
I agree.
And it's not too big. And this particular one, the dial used to be like a dark brown tone. And the tone of the dial has faded to this like very, very white kind of thing. And you could still, on the edges of the dial, there's remnants of the original color.
That's so incredible.
And so it makes it so special. And sometimes I've had many of these that are starting to fade, like little spots. But this is the most patina I've had for this reference or this year. Because it's not an old watch. This is from the 90s.
Wow.
And so in the 90s for me seems like yesterday, but like, you know what I mean? And like at this point, they're like 30 years ago. So in the 30 years that it's been alive, it's sort of like changed dramatically, and that's what kind of makes it special.
I'm gonna ask you a random question, and you could just say it doesn't exist at all. But in vintage clothing, there's efforts being made by a lot of dealers to accelerate the aging process, oxidating, whatever it may be, whether it's them hanging up 500 shirts in a salt bath outside in the sun for 6 months and then taking it out. I'm curious, is there any things similar in the
Yeah.
vintage watch world where they're trying to accelerate and give people that image of age?
Yeah, well, I think that, like there's people that chemically age sort of the bezels.
Interesting.
There's people that have tried to expose things to like a certain amount of like UV light or heat. But there's a problem with that is because the with this type of dial and with this sort of like material, it's not that you could just take some sandpaper and put a hole in it. It has to age in a very slow way. And if you age it too quickly, it starts cracking.
Really?
So too much heat will take a smooth surface and it'll like break it apart. And you could see that it was like aged in that way. Also, chemically aging a bezel etches it where the numbers aren't clear anymore. Like see the 16 on the Fuchsia.
shows, yeah.
So see how the edges of between the paint and the silver are very sharp. If you chemically age it, you're degrading it to the point where like the separation becomes very fuzzy. And there's always going to be a person in the space screaming that it's artificially aged or this is not.
Really?
But,
Really?
But in, especially dealers that me that have seen stuff and so many things, there's still a way to differentiate something that has artificial age and something that has naturally gotten to that kind of point.
That's so interesting.
Because there's a specific way that things age by themselves, and once you deviate from that path, the patina starts becoming like the wrong color, or the texture becomes the wrong color, or the wrong like surface type. So you could see things that have kind of like fallen apart.
It's funny you say that because in the vintage clothing space, I could tell if it's been artificially like
Aged.
Yeah. So you just have an eye for it at this point. I didn't know that they were actually doing that chemically.
Yeah, like like everyone like dude, there's a way to make money. Someone's gonna fucking figure it out. You know what I mean? Like it's at the end of the day, that's why you would do it. It's to make more money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So yeah. So it exists, but it isn't. It doesn't like. I don't think it tarnishes the sort of like the space. I think there's plenty of really amazing watches that have been vetted, that are in very like nice collections that have existed for a long time.
Yeah.
There's always going to be some new person that wants to like create a grading system or something, but those people are full of shit. So the people the gatekeepers and like me that know this kind of stuff, we could still tell.
Yeah.
There might be a point in time where someone will figure out a way to like someone's aging rum with like some kind of like chemical process to make it taste like very old rum or wine or something. There might be a point where like my expertise will fall off, and the only way to be able to tell would be like like a microscope or like a radio microscope or something. So, but at this point, there's still a barrier between like artificially aged and non sort of artificially aged watches.
Let's segue that into talking about this Fuchsia piece. It's amazing.
Yeah. So I brought stuff that the dials are changing, but I also brought this Fuchsia piece to show you that the actual other components of the watch age.
Yeah.
Cases, of course, we all know stainless steel will get dings and dents in them. That's normal. But some of these like other components, accessories almost on the watch, that have a utility to them, like this tells you it correlates to the 24-hour hand that goes around once in every 24 hours. And there are specific bezels from specific eras that were printed by specific manufacturers in certain specific batches that have a tendency to change in a very specific way.
That's crazy.
So, for example, late 60s, a sub-manufacturer for Rolex that provided them with these bezels had a paint formula that the red would, over time, slowly fade to like a fuchsia color.
So that was purposeful?
No, it wasn't purposeful.
Oh, okay.
It was sort of like whoever material scientist or like person that was creating that specific batch of paint changed in a very specific way. And you couldn't tell that until 40, 50, 60 years later.
Way.
And
this is part of that particular batch.
Yeah, so that's what makes this interesting. Just like the new watches that Rolex makes are sort of designed not to age like that. They're like taking extra efforts for them to be very stable. So you get what you get, and 20 years later, it still looks the same.
Wow.
But that application or that the material science wasn't known. Or, there's been times where certain components of paints, for example, like that you couldn't use lead anymore, or you couldn't use a certain kind of thing. So the new
radium and
like
the
a radium.
ones.
So there was constantly like an evolution of this is very technical, but there was a constant evolution of sort of like the actual formulation of these paints from like a chemical perspective. Like some scientists invented them red. Red in essence is a very unstable color. So it tends to fade in these kind of like complex kind of ways.
That's so cool.
And so also too, Fuchsia bezels, the blue portion of the dial turns to a kind of silvery hue. And it's just, the way it's the way it is. You know what I mean? And so now there's a time and space where when I was doing this 20 years ago, where no one gave a shit about fuchsia bezels. They were actually sort of regarded as kind of like more feminine and less popular, and other different versions were a lot more expensive, and these were sort of like kind of like put on the side.
Wow.
So and it's inverse. So style changes, taste changes. So that's just like the market.
Speaking of style changing and taste changing, I know that as you've sort of grown into the space, your taste has changed, and I know you mentioned previously that you have this particular affinity for diamonds. Could you talk to us about the piece on your wrist?
Yeah, so I'm wearing a 70s Gerald Genta design, first kind of like series 3700 Nautilus.
Could you talk to our audience about Gerald Genta for a second?
Gerald Genta was an iconic designer from in the 70s that was sort of like an independent contractor that helped design two very iconic watches, the AP 5402 and the 3700 series Nautilus. He had this sort of like design vision that in a way saved the companies, because in the 70s these manufacturers that seem now untouchable were on the sort of like on the verge of maybe going out of business, because people's pragmatism was more important than sort of like people just want to know the time. They weren't luxury items then, they were utility items, and digital watches were becoming more favorable. And why would you, in the same way, like why would you get an old mechanical watch when you get a new, better digital watch? And so there was almost a time where like those brands like died off. And so he designed the 3700. This particular version is in gold, which makes it a lot more expensive and a lot more rare. And then they made an even more rare version where there was a diamond row, 2 rows of diamonds on the outside bezel.
Incredible.
To me, is a taste change over time. I wasn't into diamonds when I was younger, but there's something like playful and fun, and it's basically like a little kaleidoscope that picks up light and it makes it more fun. So it's not for everybody. And again, I don't force anyone to like the same things that I like, but over time, the more bedazzled, like kind of like complex kind of things that were much more difficult to produce, that were produced with a lot more complex materials like diamonds, are fascinating to me. They made a lot less of them. They're much more rare, but that doesn't always translate to sellability. The gold version without the diamonds is a much easier version to sell for the same amount of money, probably. But again, I'm in a place in my life where I'm a collector and I'm a dealer, and there's certain things that I buy that appeal to me because I want to wear them. And this is one of those watches where I paid $215,000 for this watch, and I thought I could sell it for maybe like 10% more, and I've had it for like 6 months. But next year is the 50th anniversary of this watch, so I'm holding it. I think that Patek is going to do like some kind of retrospective anniversary edition of something, and I think that there'll be a lot more attention to the brand. And look, I also have one of these that I had a few years ago with a tropical dial. I needed money. I sold it at a big loss, and that watch, the dealer that I sold it to, sold it to Brad Pitt. And Brad Pitt...
I know exactly which one you're talking about.
The tropical 3700 was my watch that I bought for myself to wear. I didn't buy it to like sell it. I just wanted to wear it, and then needed money for like a big package of things that were coming in, and I like moved it because I needed money back with the company. So
sorry, and I know time is always short, but you mentioned something interesting, which is like Patek 50th anniversary, maybe something that kind of either pays homage or something that kind of might raise the value of what you're wearing. There is an interesting love-hate relationship between brands like Levi's or even to some degree like Ralph Lauren, and then their vintage sort of counterparts, those selling the original like references that they use now for new modern pieces. I'm curious, what does the institution, what do the brands think about folks like you, the vintage watch market? What do they? I'm curious as to like what their reception is.
Yeah, I feel like the reception to me, they like people call me like a gray market dealer. There's just almost like from their instance, I'm sort of like like they're the shark and I'm like the fish that attaches to the shark. They see me as more like of a parasite, not like as a person that's sort of like. But I'm a person that curates the brand, that kind of like keeps the old things alive, that kind of like makes it exciting. But I think from their commercial perspective, they're not making money on it. Where some brands like Rolex has now started buying watches to like they can't live in their own space of making new ones. They had to like come in this space because they just couldn't deal with other people like being there.
It's the same thing with Levi's and with Ralph Lauren. They're buying up a lot of their old stuff now.
Which they should celebrate their heritage, but they don't.
Yeah.
And it's sad for a lot of people that like love this stuff.
I think in our space, it's sort of the same reception, honestly.
Yeah.
Bid Stitch road trip, folks. We just stepped outside. Why? Because we want to get the full complexity of some of these pieces and the incredible wear on them. And sometimes the best way to be able to display that, to show that to you guys, is with the sun shining down on it and us seeing the age and the incredible condition on some of these, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, nothing sort of encapsulates this stuff better than actually being able to see it live and in sunshine. And when I'm buying watches, I take them outside to look at them, to be able to kind of get to get a feel of what they look like in natural light.
So beautiful. Now, what did you have this one priced at? And what was the name or the reference on it?
So this is an early chronograph from the 30s. This is priced at, I think this is actually already sold at $30,000. And I'm actually shipping it out today after this video.
Next up, we got the Explorer. Really, I mean, this one is one of those where you're 100% right. In the sun and the light, like it carries this different sort of value to it. Yeah, could you tell us, maybe point towards some of the age on it?
Yeah, so I think if you look especially at the 12 o'clock, there is degrading around the triangle and it's turning a little more brown. The luminous material in this instance is radium and it's sort of aging the dial around it. And there's some scratches on the watch, on the case, and the hands have sort of patinaed a little bit. There's also a little bit of lume loss at the 6 o'clock. You can see that the bottom of the dial is a little bit lighter on the 6, the bottom of the 6, which is sort of normal degradation that these kind of go through. This is probably aged a little bit more than some people would like. In person, it's fantastic. On the website, some of the scratches on the subdials are a little bit more apparent, but there's a different level and a different thing that everyone is looking for.
And what do you have this Explorer priced at?
This is listed, I think, in the high teens. This is my watch, so it's not for sale, but we can see it.
Yeah, that's fine. Now you sold its counterpart, right? Recently.
Well, not the counterpart. I sold a very early version of a Milgauss, a 6541, and that one was from the late 50s, and the dial has aged to like a beautiful tropical dial. That watch currently is not here, but we have videos of it, and the sad thing is a lot of times this really kind of special things I only have for maybe a day or two before it sells.
But this one here is your personal.
This one here is my personal watch. It's a red Submariner from the 70s. I've had it almost 10 years now. And I have another one that I've had for 15 years. And both of these watches are eventually going to be given to my 2 kids when they're old enough to get them without losing them. And hopefully a good reminder of dad.
How cool their dad is.
So, this is a late 60s, like a 69 GMT with a Fuchsia bezel insert. The way that the bezel has faded is very specific to this time period of the late 60s. And this is now a matte dial, so the print is in white. And the earlier version of this watch, the print would have been in gold. And this is a Mark I matte dial, so the first series of GMT with the white dial.
And what do you have this one priced at?
This one I believe is at $21,000. So yeah, this is a very unique way and very advanced way that this watch is sort of aged. This dial was a brown tone, and the brown has faded completely to a shiny gold kind of silver kind of tone. You could still see the remnants of the paint on the edges of the dial, where you could see some of the brown, and that was the original color. And this isn't really old. This is from the 90s.
Wow.
So to have something age
it's crazy.
This much is pretty unique. This is the most patina that I've seen on this reference and on this particular dial.
So sick. What do you have this one priced at?
We have this one priced in the low $20,000 range.
Okay, last but not least, the big boy. One of the, personal favorites.
I personally love this watch. I wear it occasionally. This is a 3700 from the mid 70s. And this particular version of the 3700 is in gold and has a diamond 2-row bezel. Extremely rare, expensive. I paid $215,000 for this watch. I have it listed in the $230,000 range, and it's on the site and available. But you know, it's a piece that has a very specific buyer, and sometimes it takes maybe like sometimes, you know, like a few months to sell.
Yeah.
But I didn't really buy this to resell. I bought it really to kind of like wear, which is it gives me a lot of joy.
It's amazing. So I know right now gold price is skyrocketing. I've even heard of some people like buying watches and melting them. I don't know. It's crazy. Has the inflation on the watch directly attributable to the increase in gold pricing?
Well, I think there's a lot more attention to it. We're still not melt value on presidentials. I think the melt value is in the $12,000, $13,000 range, and I think the secondary market for this watch is in the, without this dial, probably at the $18,000, $19,000 range. So there's a possibility that, yeah, if we get gold high enough, that it's going to be more beneficial to melt the watches, but that's actually happened before in the past. So I think in like the 70s, the people who used to melt their bracelets, so a lot of these are head only from like the 70s.
No way.
Because it was cheaper to melt, or you got more money for melting the watch than you could actually selling it.
That's crazy.
So hopefully it doesn't get to that point. Because you know, it's super sad, you know what I mean? When
Of
people are
course.
melting these like beautiful icons, and it's like basically taking like, you know, vintage Porsches and like steel value is more than the car, and like everyone's like crushing them. That's a very kind of sad moment.
Oh, 100%. That's incredible. I didn't know that people actually did that.
Yeah, well, there was
a period where they
there's
did
like
that.
there's also like a jeweler like in New York, the guy that wears the hats. I forget his name. Moses. Yeah, Moses took an AP. The AP video got a lot of attention because he basically took the diamonds off it. He melted the thing, and then he's like showing like fat stacks of cash. Like, I got, you know, 30,000 melting, and I could have sold it for like, I don't know. He got like high 30s, but he really could have sold it only for 32. But he got 35, 36. You know, just because gold hit such a high point.
That's crazy.
But things catch up where, you know, initially you could do that, but then like that watch that people know is meltable at 34, 35, then the value, they'll want 40 for it.
Yeah.
So there's these moments when like commodity price shifts too quickly up, then it kind of like makes these things happen.
Wow.
And it's fun for making videos that get like, you know, clicks, but it's not the reality of the space.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm curious, your best flip you've ever had, best margins on buying something and reselling it, what is it?
Yeah, probably the most money I've made on a single watch was buying a vintage Submariner 5512, and when I bought it, I couldn't tell because it was so damaged, the crystal, that I couldn't tell what the watch looked like, and I couldn't tell and the photograph was so bad because it was an older gentleman that sold it to me, that he had his like nephew take a photo for him, and they did just like indoor photo. So I couldn't tell the dial was turning a brown color, and I couldn't tell that the watch was like gold. The watch was a gilt print.
Wow.
Because it was so bad, and because of crystal you couldn't sell. But I could tell that the case wasn't polished. He never changed and never serviced it. I bought it for I think 30,000, and I think maybe at that point it was worth 50. But I held on to it for a few years because I put it in my collection. And then when I sold it for like 150,000. But that, you know, it was two things. You know, I've owned it for 5 years where the market got really crazy on them. And also I bought it for like a good deal when I initially bought it too. So I don't know if that's like I didn't flip it right away.
Yeah.
It was a long-term hold. But,
that's so cool.
But there's watches that I've had that like I've sold for 120,000, and then like 7 years later they're like $1.5 million.
Wow.
So who knew? If I knew, I would have kept
That's crazy.
them, so.
Okay, what do you think the market is undervaluing on, and what do you think the market is overvaluing on right now?
I think that's a good question. You know, I mean, everyone is trying to figure out where the market is and where the value is, or where there's where there's spaces for arbitrage to get money. I think the vintage market is sort of, in my humble opinion, undervalued. It's what I sell, so again, the caveat of like that. But I think that it fell a lot, and things that were 30,000 are like 15,000, and I think it's slowly and surely coming back, and I think it's going to reach those levels again, and it's going to, I think, surpass them again.
Very cool.
So really cool, nice condition sport models from Rolex, I think, are undervalued.
Okay, anything that you think, I don't know why the hell people are paying up so high for this right now.
Yeah, the hype beast sort of things that you're seeing, like AP, random, like bamboo kind of things. Those were all like melt value watches for the longest period of time. Literally, like only a few years ago. When you bought those, you'd have to buy them at what the value of the gold was.
Yeah.
And now they're hyped for, you know, like, and Cartier is hyped, I think. But I think that people are sort of like getting that, and the market is kind of not collapsed, but it's sort of kind of plateauing and going down on certain models. And there's not that many of them. So one celebrity wearing them doesn't mean all of them in the world are worth that.
Exactly.
It's just like one person wearing them.
Okay, give me your position. There's a huge popularity trend with geezer watches.
Yeah.
Maybe tell our audience what a geezer watch is.
So geezer watch, usually integrated bracelet, stuff from the 70s that's like funky. I think a group of few people put together this sort of like perception that that they're cool now, but I think they're way overvalued. I think that the market on those is they're very hard to sell, and the reality is integrated watches, which means that you can't take the band off them or adjust them without cutting the watch at a goldsmith, are super hard to sell.
Yeah, it makes it so much less marketable.
If it doesn't fit you, it's impossible to make it fit, and I think that market is way overvalued.
Bid Stitch gang. Jacek, thank you so much. Watch, and if you're interested in watches, if you're interested in just seeing incredible pieces of history, be sure to check out his page. Do you have a, wait, you don't have a showroom or anything?
No showroom, everything's online, but you know, like, and really, I think that's the best way to kind of be able to kind of reach a big audience all over the world instead of just being like localized to one small space.
Your website?
Tropicalwatch.com.
And WatchAnd is the Instagram.
WatchAnd is the Instagram handle, yeah.
Beautiful. And if you ever want to sell us something for a 90% discount, be sure to let me know, okay?
Yeah. Bid Stitch, it's hard.
Bid Stitch.